We're going to be recording. Good morning, everyone. My name's Helen McIntosh, and I'm the president of the South East London Chamber of Commerce. I'm delighted to be able to introduce Lisa Rothon from Thackeray Williams, who works in the area of employment law, but she's quite a specialist on the menopause at work. And I do notice we have a lot of ladies on the call, and I do hope we have some chaps who understand the issues a lot better afterwards. This is also going to be on our website afterwards, which is why we're recording it. And I'm going to ask, if you'd like to ask a question, can you save it to the end and then put the little yellow hand up to ask your question? Okay, so off we go. Lisa, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you all for joining the webinar today, and taking the opportunity really to, oh, hold on, bear with me, I've just lost my notes. Yeah, so just taking the opportunity to further educate yourselves on the menopause. I think just by way of introduction, as Helen said, so my name's Lisa, I am a senior associate solicitor in the employment team here at Thackeray Williams. And menopause is something that we're seeing crop up now more and more often. I think pre-COVID, we began to see a real move in raising awareness and normalising the conversation around mental health. And this was really accelerated during COVID itself, when we was all kind of thrust into unknown circumstances, various lockdowns, not being able to see friends and family, etc., working from home alone. And I think at that point, employers really noticed or realised actually the importance of supporting their staff during these times and moving forwards. And as a result of that, we have seen a real positive move in the kind of the mental health movement. Employers are really opening up the conversations around mental health. They're offering support, training to staff and management. And we've seen the introduction of a lot of wellbeing initiatives. And actually, my view and the view of the employment team here at Thackeray Williams is that normalising the conversation around menopause and ensuring staff are adequately supported is merely an extension of that kind of workplace wellbeing support. The menopause is going to affect every single woman, trans and non-binary individuals. Yet, actually, there's so many people, men and women, in fact, that have a real little understanding of what the menopause actually is and what its effects are. Over the last year or so, we have seen, again, some movement in normalising the topic of menopause. And I'm sure lots of you have seen the support from the celebs out there. So Davina McCall, Penny Lancaster, Rod Stewart himself. And there's also a lot of brands getting on board with supporting the menopause. Actually, you can see some pictures there. I went into Boots recently, and actually Number 7 have launched their own skincare range. Actually, a friend of mine sent me a poster on the right that was actually put up in the men's toilets. It's slightly misdirected because it's actually signposting support for women, but I think the intention's there. It's not just about kind of educating women on menopause, but also men. However, I think there's still a long way to go. There's still a long way to go in kind of pushing menopause out there. And specifically in the workplace, it still remains somewhat of a taboo subject. I think there are lots of people still embarrassed to talk about the topic, and it leaves not only individuals unprepared, but also employers and colleagues unprepared, not only to support each other, but also kind of their extended family and friends. That lack of support also has resulted in a loss of menopausal women from the workplace. And actually that loss of talent is really significant for employers. And concurrently with that, actually, whilst previously there's been very few UK employment tribunal cases citing the menopause as the reason for their less favourable or unfavourable treatment, actually recent trends show that this is changing significantly. And as a result, employers really need to start taking a proactive approach towards this subject. So today I'm going to provide some guidance on what organisations need to be doing to ensure that they've got the right policies and procedures in place to support their staff as fully as possible when it comes to all things menopause. And as Helen's mentioned, there'll also be a question and answer session at the end to give you all the opportunity to ask any questions on perhaps matters that I haven't covered. But I thought it'd be useful, before I get into the legals of it all, that actually I start with a short section on what the menopause is. I think in order for employers and managers to effectively be able to support their staff, they really need to have an understanding of what the menopause is. When I deliver these webinars or menopause events, I am normally accompanied by a nurse specialist in menopause. But for today's purposes, she's very kindly allowed me to kind of touch upon her area of expertise and use some of her presentation to share with you today. So I think just to give, I'll only give a brief overview. I am not the medic, but just to kind of to give a baseline understanding. So the menopause, the word itself can be split up into menopause, and ultimately this means the pause on a woman's menstrual cycle. It's the time when a woman's ovaries stop producing hormones and menstrual periods cease. It's a normal part of aging, and the average age for menopause is around 50 to 51. The menopause journey can be split into 3 stages. So there's not just the menopause itself, but actually there is a stage called perimenopause. And this is when the ovaries start producing less estrogen. You then move into the stage of menopause, and this is when the last menstrual period happens. And then a woman effectively goes into what they call the postmenopausal stage immediately after that. Whilst the average age of the menopause for most women is around 50 to 51, actually 1% of the female population will experience the menopause before the age of 40. And this is called premature ovarian insufficiency. And some will also have their last period, so go into the menopause between the ages of 40 to 45. And this is called early menopause and is significantly earlier than the average age. There are numerous causes of the menopause. There's not just the natural menopause, which occurs at the time expected, but there's also a surgical menopause. So actually, if an individual goes through any type of surgery that results in their ovaries being removed, then they are pushed into what we call a surgical menopause. And of course, that could happen at an earlier age than 50. There's also the medical menopause, and actually this is often caused by medical treatments for cancer. So for example, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and the results of these therapies can again result in an individual going into early menopause. And actually, if that treatment occurs at an early enough age, not only does this affect a woman in respect of putting her into menopause, but it also affects her fertility. So we potentially have employees dealing not only with going into early menopause, but the fact that there may be fertility complications as well. And for some individuals, there's no known cause for the menopause. And the nurse specialist that I normally work with, actually, her youngest patient was 14. So 14-year-old going into menopause, no known reason for that, but ultimately at 14, she's dealing with the symptoms that come with that. And actually, so the menopause affects women in the sense that we have estrogen receptor cells all over our bodies. They all rely on estrogen in order to maintain their full functionality and to remain healthy. So as estrogen production stops, these cells that are all over our bodies are affected, and ultimately they result in an enormous array of symptoms as a result. And actually, symptoms can be divided into a number of categories, and they actually go far beyond the common preconception that the menopause only causes hot flushes. And there's actually now at least 48 recorded symptoms of the menopause, and there are common symptoms. So hot flushes, night sweats, fatigue, and sleeping issues are quite common for lots of women. But there's also physical changes. So women going through the menopause may experience hair thinning or loss, dizziness, palpitations, and bladder issues. They may feel the need to use the toilet more often than they used to or previously did. And it can also result in incontinence. And there's also emotional symptoms. So menopause can cause severe anxiety. It can cause a loss of confidence. And actually, some of these symptoms can be very embarrassing for individuals, especially if they're having to deal with them whilst at work. And these symptoms don't only occur at the point an individual enters the menopause stage, but they can actually occur several years prior to menopause. And for many women, from the point of their last period, these symptoms last on average 4 years. So it isn't just a short period of time. But for 1 in 10 women, they may experience their symptoms for up to 12 years. And there is a small cohort of women who will experience them for much longer. Charlie, I'm going to move on to my presentation now. So I think historically, employers haven't really needed to pay the matter of menopause in the workplace context much attention. Women were living much longer and actually were often passing away before they even reached menopausal age, or if they did, there were very few women in the workplace itself. But actually, as people, and women included, are now living much longer, it's been found that they are likely to spend at least a third of their lives in the menopause. And the Office for National Statistics has actually highlighted that menopausal women are now the fastest growing demographic in the workforce. There are now more than 3 million menopausal women aged over 50 at work. A report commissioned by the Government Equalities Office actually recognised that the fact that there will now be more working women experiencing the menopause during their working lives than ever before. And we have touched upon some of the symptoms already, but actually those symptoms vary from individual to individual. Every person's menopause experience will be different to the next person. And actually some women may sail through the menopause with very few symptoms, but for others, the effect of these symptoms can be enormous. And where those individuals do suffer severely with symptoms, they can have a significant impact on the individual's day-to-day activities and their ability to perform as they normally would in the workplace. And actually, just some more statistics for you. Research by the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development showed that actually 59% of working women aged 45 to 55 who are experiencing menopausal symptoms say it negatively affects them at work. And actually, a recent report carried out for Davina McCall's last show on Channel 4, Sex, Myths and Menopause, their report showed that 1 in 10 people actually quit their job because of their symptoms at work. Until more recently, workplace and working practice, they haven't really been aligned with the menopause in mind, despite the fact that so many of the menopausal symptoms can present significant and sometimes embarrassing challenges for women. And actually, another recent survey found that 63% of menopausal participants said that their workplace actually had no policy to support employees at work. And as a result of this, unfortunately, we've seen employers often mistakenly initiate performance plans or disciplinary procedures or sickness absence procedures with menopausal women that are being affected by their symptoms at work. And actually, in some cases, these individuals are being dismissed. I think the increasing coverage on the matter in the press, so that mentions of menopause in the press and via these high profile celebrity endorsed campaigns, we are actually seeing more individuals and more employees willing to challenge their employers' conduct. And actually that has been reflected in a corresponding increase in the number of tribunal claims citing menopause discrimination as the reason for their less favourable treatment by their employer. Menopause itself isn't at the moment what we call a protected characteristic under the UK's Equality Act. And although they are lobbying this in Parliament, there are consultations currently going on to try and have it recognised as a protected characteristic. So i.e. an individual shouldn't be treated less favourably because of the menopause or symptoms that they are experiencing as a result. We're not quite there. So what individuals are now looking to do is bring tribunal claims on the basis of age, sex, or in some instances, disability discrimination. So where the effects of the menopause have a significant adverse impact on a person's ability to carry out their day-to-day activities, then they are relying on disability discrimination. But that's somewhat a negative connotation. We're having to rely on disability discrimination in order to raise concerns around being treated less favourably because of menopause. And actually, the menopause isn't a negative thing. It's a natural process for the majority that is going to affect all of us. In the first 6 months of 2021, so we're slightly behind. Because of COVID, it's taken such a long time for cases to get through the tribunal at the moment. So we're hoping for an update on some of these figures soon. But actually, in the first 6 months of 2021, there were 10 cases recorded as citing menopause as the reason that an individual was treated less favourably or unfavourably by their employer. And although that doesn't sound like a significant figure in itself, it actually represents a threefold increase in cases involving the menopause in the last 3 years. And actually, this trajectory is expected just to continue upwards. And so I think more so now than ever, our message is that employers really need to acknowledge those individuals going through the menopause within their workplace. Although it's not just a case of equipping employers and managers with information about the menopause and the skills they need to feel confident in perhaps discussing the topic with their line reports or their teams, but it's about raising awareness across the board. So raising this awareness with all employees. I think often individuals themselves aren't even aware actually that they're experiencing menopausal or perimenopausal symptoms, or maybe they just don't feel comfortable discussing menopause with their employers. So employers are really encouraged to open up the discussions and provide support for individuals and the side effects perhaps they're experiencing, because this will help create a happy and therefore a productive workplace where these individuals feel comfortable and supported. And it's very well documented that where employees feel comfortable and supported, they are more likely to stay at work. Of course, for employers, we're always looking at protecting the business as well. What can they be doing to protect the business? And ultimately ensuring staff are supported and feel comfortable at work. If they are going through the menopause and experience symptoms that affect them, then ultimately this is going to lead to a reduced risk in the number of disputes or any type of litigation against the business. So what can employers do? The bottom line is they need to open up and normalise the conversations. As we've done with mental health, we really need to make this topic one that everybody feels comfortable talking about. But how can they do that, and what else can they be doing? So there's some really inexpensive ways actually that employers that perhaps haven't already taken steps or are looking for some ideas. There's a lot of inexpensive ways that they can do this. So the first is just sharing information on the menopause. So it could be in the form of posters, as we saw at the start. So putting them up in the kitchen, staff rooms, toilets, where they can be seen by everybody. That's not just in female toilets, but in male toilets as well. As I said, the idea is we're educating everybody on the menopause. We want everybody to have an understanding. It could be that useful links are signposted on kind of internal intranets or internal chat services used within the organisation, or perhaps HR could send a weekly email. Again, signposting useful information and resources, perhaps sharing information within the body of the email. And if an organisation offers what we call an employee assistance programme, then employees can be signposted to that as well. As I said, not all staff want to discuss it with their employer, what they're going through, but perhaps actually just getting some support from an external third party will help them either address how they're feeling or to kind of build that confidence in speaking to their employer. As I've mentioned, it is important to train managers. We want managers to have an understanding of what the menopause is, but also educate them on the range of effects that the menopause could be having on their teams or their direct line reports, or actually anybody that feels confident approaching them, but also give them an understanding or some information on, well, what can the organisation offer these individuals? So if they are approached and an individual is having difficulties, then what can the organisation do? It might be a good idea for employees to create kind of a guidance document for these managers. So they've got it kind of as a checklist, and and hopefully that will help them feel confident having discussions if they are approached, or actually feel confident approaching their own team members if they think that the individuals are having difficulties at work. They could perhaps suggest weekly or regular one-to-ones with these staff members. So just to check in and kind of keep those lines of communication with their staff members open. As I mentioned previously, but actually we also want training for the wider workforce. We want everybody to have a clear understanding of what the menopause is, and perhaps then have an understanding of what their colleagues are going through, the people they're sitting next to at work, the people they're working with on a daily basis. Actually, why have they suddenly changed? Why is there a change in their behaviour? Let's make sure everybody understands. Staff between themselves or employers could also have a dedicated menopause mentor. So this is an individual that people know they can go and talk to in a confidential setting about what they're going through, what they're experiencing, or perhaps what difficulties they're having at work. It may be worth having an open door policy, perhaps once a week, for example. So actually, staff don't feel that going to knock on this individual's door is going to be interrupting them. There is an allocated day or time slot that they can go along, and they know that this is kind of allocated to having those conversations. And also, employees can put in place a menopause policy, as we have with many other types of procedures and processes internally. A menopause policy is a great starting point for employers. You can have a written, well-published document that encourages these open discussions. It reassures staff that conversations will be dealt with sensitively and in a confidential manner. And it sets out, both for managers and staff, what processes and procedures will be followed if they are struggling at work. So if we move on to the next slide then, so what type of adjustments can employers put in place? So what can they be doing to support staff? Adjustments can be physical, or they could involve changes to working patterns, for example, but it's important that employers recognise that adjustments need to be tailored to an individual's specific needs. As I've said, the menopause will affect individuals differently across the board, and it's not going to be a case that one size fits all. They need to be having these conversations with staff members. So it may be that employers can look at ways of cooling a working environment for somebody that is experiencing hot flushes. Perhaps they could provide them with a desk fan, or move their desk to a window, or adjust the air conditioning for them. Also provide easy access to cold drinking water and to washrooms. It could be the case that if women are required to wear a uniform to work, we'll provide them with extra sets of uniform. If it's likely that they're going to need to kind of wash them after every wear when perhaps they wouldn't normally, make it easy for them. Give them some extra sets of uniform, or perhaps if it's not a case that individuals have to wear a uniform, relax the dress code for these individuals to help them improve, so they can improve their comfort at work. Employers could also allow for more frequent breaks during the day and time during the day for individuals to get up and move. I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but actually one of the physical effects of the menopause can be that actually women experience real stiffness in their muscles. And I've actually met somebody that she went from exercising, living by the beach, exercising daily, walks, runs along the beach, walking the dog, to literally not being able to get up or sit down on her chair. And movement, allowing regular movement, can help this. So give the staff the opportunity to do that. They could also allocate or provide a quiet area for these individuals to work, or to access a restroom, and allow the individuals time to do that. So as I've said, one symptom of the menopause for some individuals can be that they need to use the toilet more often, or perhaps there are concerns around incontinence. So don't question them if they need to use the toilet more often. Allow this. As I mentioned, they could also consider actually a change to working patterns, or offer flexible working. So it could be that a later start would help individuals, or an earlier finish. Employers could also allow time off for GP or specialist appointments, as we do with antenatal appointments. Why are we not doing the same with appointments related to menopause, and these individuals going off and getting the medical help and support that they need? It's important to discuss the adjustments with the individual, and perhaps that could include a discussion around the individual's duties and responsibilities. Actually, is there anything that's causing them particular difficulty? And perhaps that those tasks could be reallocated elsewhere for a period of time. And Actually, employers should also remember that occupational health are there to help. So a referral to occupational health may provide some further assistance or support or suggestions on what employers could be doing specifically for individuals to help them. If an employer has an existing benefit scheme, it could be that they could also offer support via that scheme. So I think lots of these schemes already offered subsidised gym memberships, but perhaps in addition they could offer subsidised memberships to other exercise classes. I've met quite a few women that said actually things like yoga and Pilates or going off and getting some physiotherapy have really helped their symptoms. So actually offer subsidised memberships to those types of activities instead. Or it could be in the form of financial support with private appointments. I think unfortunately lots of the women that I have spoken to have found that perhaps GPs aren't equipped to provide the help and support that these women need, and they're having to go off and pay for private appointments and support. And perhaps until that position changes, again, I know that that's something that is changes the kind of training for GPs, but until we're at a stage where GPs can offer the level of support and advice required, employers could offer to make a contribution towards an individual's costs of seeking private help and support. So what are the advantages of making these changes for both employers and employees? Well, firstly, employers will attract and retain a diverse and inclusive workforce. They will also attract and retain valuable skills and talent. Many individuals that are going through the menopause are at an age when actually they've got a great deal of experience and expertise in their field, and we want to retain that in the workforce. We don't want to lose it because they don't feel supported with their menopausal symptoms. Actually, staff will then feel supported, motivated and more loyal, and are more likely to therefore stay within the workforce. And you'll also see increased productivity and decreased absence. That in turn means that employers save on recruitment. We've got less people leaving, so we don't need to incur those recruitment costs, go through interview process, etc. And as I said, and importantly for businesses, it will mitigate the likelihood of legal disputes. Legal disputes for employers are timely, expensive, and can damage reputation. And as we see menopause discussed more and more, I think actually the reputational damage that can be caused to employers that actually don't get on board with supporting staff is going to be great moving forward. And actually, I've mentioned a menopause policy. If employers do find themselves having to defend a claim brought on grounds that an individual has been treated less favourably because of the menopause or menopausal symptoms, if an employer can show that they have a menopause policy in place, that their staff have been put through training to help these individuals, it's going to stand them in a much better stead for defending these claims if they do find themselves. But ultimately, the idea of kind of putting this support in place is to avoid that type of action. We're not suggesting that normalising the conversation around menopause is going to be an overnight change, but I think never before has it been more important for employers to really stand up and take note and support employees' health and well-being, including the menopause. I've mentioned a number of inexpensive ways that actually employers can destigmatise menopause in the workplace by raising awareness, enhancing understanding, and ultimately that will discourage discrimination in the workplace as well. We've discussed that a menopause policy is a great starting point, and actually we've seen lots of big household names already kind of take this on board and demonstrate investment in it. I think HSBC, Timpson's, the Post Office, they're all on board with this. And actually I'm aware of a programme called Gen M, and actually that has been set up to help organisations and brands really move forward in supporting staff with the menopause. And actually there are a lot of big household names and brands already signed up to that. Marks and Spencer's, Boots, Holland and Barrett, they are all a member of this kind of movement, not only in supporting their staff, but actually developing products that will perhaps help individuals that are going through the menopause. And I mentioned at the start, we've seen Number 7 more recently launch their own kind of skincare range around this. I think, as I said, I think that we've seen some real good steps towards opening up this conversation. But unfortunately, in the events that I've done previously, women specifically that have come along and shared their own experiences, they still don't feel comfortable having the conversations in the workplace, and they don't feel that they can approach their staff. I met one lady specifically, she actually worked in the education sector, and this was the same lady that was experiencing some difficulty with her movement all of a sudden. She found that she was suffering from crippling anxiety, and she tried to hide it from both family and at work. But there was one occasion when she was required to be going on a school trip, and actually she was just overcome with crippling anxiety. And she was sat in the staff room and she was approached by the head teacher, who asked if she was okay, and she thought she'd take the opportunity to perhaps explain that she wasn't, and that she felt really anxious, and she thought that it could be related to the menopause. And actually the head teacher said to her, well, hopefully she gets over that soon, and walked off. And after that point, this individual didn't feel that she could raise that conversation again. And actually, as her symptoms worsened, because she didn't have the confidence to discuss her own experience with her employer, she actually resigned from her role. She did take the opportunity to go off and interview for a new role. And actually, in her words, it was her dream job. It was kind of a step up in the education sector, and it would have been her dream role. She prepared for the interview and she went along, but in her own words, it was an absolute flop. She said that she turned up, because her muscle pain was so bad on that day, she couldn't sit down and get comfortable. She was sat on the edge of her chair, and actually she then experienced total brain fog. And this is a symptom that I hear lots of ladies refer to. She couldn't retain the questions that were being asked of her. She couldn't then formulate her response, and actually she didn't get the role, and she hasn't gone back into the education sector. She's now through the menopause, or the worst of her symptoms, and she's a menopause campaigner. But it just goes to show the extreme impact that the menopause and its symptoms can have on individuals, and why it's so important to make sure that we're supporting them. Okay. I've included just at the end here, I've just included at the end here, it's a leaflet. It's quite small though. Just some links myself. So I've signposted, I don't know if we can make that bigger, but signposted just some organisations that offer some really useful information and resources around menopause. There's actually some really great links on Instagram as well, other individuals sharing their stories, exercise classes that can help, information around nutrition that can help. So I don't know whether that could maybe be shared with participants today, or if we can make it bigger so that they can take a note. But there's lots of useful information out there.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And yes, we will share that to everyone. My goodness, that was such an interesting talk. And I found, the Gen M thing, that was quite fascinating to get the brands behind it.
Yes. Yeah, and there are a lot of brands. They're doing some great work, actually. There are a lot of brands signed up now. But as I said, it's actually their focus is enhancing the consumer experience. So it's not just about ensuring that these organisations educate their own staff, but actually looking at how can we make the entire kind of experience, specifically for kind of shopping brands, how can they make the shopping experience more enjoyable? What products can they be kind of researching and putting out there that may assist more than others? I think there are lots of great products out there already. Having spoken to the nurse specialist that I work with, actually, there's already lots of kind of creams and healthy alternatives that can help. But I think that's kind of the idea about Gen M. Let's kind of get it out there, let's educate, and how can we help these individuals?
Yeah, incredible. Charlie, do you think you could take the slide down, and then we'll see everyone? And if everyone can, if you've got a camera, if you can put your camera on, then we'll see you. Now, do I have any questions? Can I see little yellow hands? No questions? No? Can you see any? Ah, is that Jenny? Jenny, you're on mute. You're mute.
There we go. Here we go. Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Hi. Thank you. That was really interesting talking. It's been pulling together what we at our workplace we have started the conversation and
Okay,
started
great.
looking at our policy,
Mm.
trying to bring this as a normal subject to talk about and
Yeah.
make it open and inclusive. So thank you for that. I just one of the things I wanted to say was that people think that when you're going through the menopause, that if you have a symptom, that you're going to get better. So it's like, oh, how are you feeling today? So if somebody, if it's rage, like, how are you feeling today? Oh, I'm really struggling. Oh, hope you feel better tomorrow.
Yeah.
Actually making people realize that it's a long-term process and you don't get fixed overnight. So
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the things that has to be raised.
Yeah, and I think actually the symptoms can change. So it's not that you kind of start off with a set of symptoms and that's what continues for the next 4, 5, 10 years. Actually, they change. So you may not get hot flushes to start with, but you may experience the muscle pain or the anxiety. But actually, the hot flushes may come down the line. So it's important that employers really, as you would, and I don't like to use this word because, as I said, menopause isn't a disability, but if you've got a disabled employee in your workplace, then you have discussions around adjustments. What can you be doing? But you check in, you make sure those adjustments are still working, and you have to do the same with individuals going through the menopause, because actually what may work at the start may not be working 2 years down the line, and you want to make sure that they feel comfortable kind of approaching you to say, right, this isn't what I need anymore. I'm not having hot flushes and I'm really cold sat under the air conditioning. But having the conversation, or you checking in with them, having regular reviews to make sure the adjustments are still appropriate, or actually are there new adjustments that need to be made or different adjustments. So I think you're absolutely right. But it's getting the information out there, because like you said, actually people need to understand it's not an overnight symptom. They're going to last, and at the point people have got that understanding, then they're less likely to be asking questions or making statements, oh, I hope you feel better tomorrow. But I think that's just a lack of understanding of what the menopause is and the effect of the symptoms.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen. Any more? Can we see any yellow hands? Oh, I think Grace has just blocked herself out. No more questions. Well, Lisa, I think this has been absolutely fascinating.
Good, I'm glad.
And this will go up on our website. And I think it's going to be interesting as more people, return to work. I mean, I know Zachary Williams, you're very much a hybrid, organization, and you've got new offices in your work. Are you 2 days a week in?
Yes, so anyone that works full time, they're in 2 days a week. Have to do a minimum of 2 days, but they're really flexible. Depends on workload. I think lots of employers are doing the same, which actually for individuals that are perhaps going through the menopause, actually it's already then the option is there to do days from home. On those days perhaps they don't feel well enough to come in, but they could work from home. But employers that perhaps are requiring staff to come in full time, flexible working is not only do individuals subject to a certain amount of continuous services, etc., have the right to formally request flexible working, but it's also something that can be put in place as an adjustment. So it may be that it's working from home 1 or 2 days a week. As I said, it may be earlier finish times, later start times. It's about having the conversation and what's going to work for those individuals.
We have Eunice.
Yes, hello. Hello. A quick question is that if you have a male, as your manager,
yes,
we know it's quite sensitive, talking about the menopause, how, you might feel very, uncomfortable to approach it. So what could you do? How could you go about?
Well, I think that's the idea of training all staff. So we do know that men are perhaps more reluctant to talk about menopause than women, albeit there are also lots of women that are embarrassed to raise the subject. But it's about training and opening up the conversation so that everybody feels comfortable. And I think providing kind of training across the board, so everybody is involved in that training, everybody has been involved in those conversations, will help. Having a menopause policy in place will help, because then both the manager and the individual know what kind of process the organisation will follow. But if it's the case that a certain individual doesn't feel comfortable approaching their direct line manager, then perhaps there's somebody else within the organisation they could approach. And really, that's where the idea of a menopause mentor comes in. If organisations have a menopause mentor, then there is somebody else that individuals know they can go along and speak to about their difficulties, or just share their experience if they want to. But the idea is we want men educated as well. We want everybody talking about this. We don't want it to be the case, but there will always be some individuals that don't want to share their experience, whether their manager is male or female. They just don't want to have those conversations. So it's important that organisations ensure there is an alternative in place. So, for example, that kind of mentor, or if HR are putting out communications, they also make quite clear that they can be approached to have these discussions if they want to.
Okay, thank you.
Lisa, may I ask a question? I saw it on the slide, but no one's talked about, brain fog, which I think can be a really, really terrible, terrible thing. Would you say if an organisation has the policies in place, for the menopause, and say, a major error was made by someone, rather like yourselves, you're a solicitor, and if your brain's all fogged up and you make an error, would that help you in any subsequent litigation if the policy was in place?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the point an employer is looking at addressing that situation, they need to take that into account. So we would expect them at that point, if it's a huge error and perhaps they feel the need to go through some kind of formal process, then that process involves having a conversation and speaking with the employee. And absolutely, if there is a reason there that has affected the individual's performance and perhaps resulted in the error, then absolutely it needs to be taken into account by the employer when they're deciding on what action is required in the situation, if any action at all. It will of course depend on what the error is, but absolutely any kind of symptoms that were being experienced that affected performance, judgment, memory, they should all be taken into account. And actually brain fog is a huge one that lots of women I've spoken to have experienced. Just the not being able to retain information, or not being able to read a book anymore because you can't remember what happened in the last chapter, even though you've only just read it. So it's a real big one for employers to kind of be aware of and take on board.
Yeah. Excellent. I think, And I know this personal thing, a friend of mine, early 50s, she works in a jeweler, and she was terribly brain fogged, and she got caught out when you couldn't get any HRT.
Right.
So she's got no patches, and she managed, and luckily it was found, but very high-end jeweler, and she chucked a diamond ring in the bin.
Okay, yeah. And what did the employer do in those circumstances?
Well, luckily that everyone went through the bin, because they realised, they knew they hadn't sold it, so they were literally raking through the bin. And she was mortified because she had no, she didn't know she'd done it. I mean, we can all do these, silly things, and I can assure you continue way after the menopause as well.
No, absolutely, and that's it. And that's, I think, what Jenny said. Actually, the importance for everyone is realizing that these symptoms aren't just an overnight thing. They're going to last for a significant period of time. And if an individual's working during that time, it can have a real impact on performance at work. I know that the nurse specialist that I work with, she's had patients come to her and say, I think I'm going crazy. I've been referred to you, but actually I think I'm going crazy. I think I'm having some kind of breakdown. And she says, you're not, you're actually just going through the menopause. It's not that at all. But so actually there's so many women out there that don't recognize the symptoms, especially when they happen perhaps before the last period. So they're not even perhaps thinking of menopause. It's not even on their radar, but actually they can happen for several years prior to the actual menopause. But women just don't even put the kind of join the dots up, and it's not something that they even consider.
Yeah, we've got another question. Is that I'm squinting at the thing. Is it Hadija?
Yeah, hi. I think the presentation is really good, and it's kind of opening my mind, because for us, we work in the domestic abuse sector, and we work with high risk cases, you know, of women and men. And I think there is a need, apart from supporting us who have reached the menopause, but I think there is a need to include it in the way when we are carrying out assessments, because if you look at some of the symptoms, this could be maybe the reasons why maybe people have misunderstandings as a family. And many times we don't look at that. We don't try to assess that side of the story. We ask different questions, and we don't ask about the menopause, you know, we do ask about the mental health, and then we don't ask about the other thing. So for me, I think this is something we are going to suggest to our organization, to see how do we include that in not only understanding the impact, but also understanding how this could be attributing to some of the cases that we are handling, not only during assessment, but also during the support process. I think this is something that needs to have a continuous conversations, you know, between us and our clients, but also between us, the staff, and the employers.
Yeah, and that's it. It's about kind of educating everybody to kind of have this understanding. And actually, I know that it's now on the curriculum at schools. So actually, the small ones will be learning about it from kind of school age, or at the point it's taught, or they're being taught about sex education. Actually, being taught about the menopause is also now going to be on the curriculum. So hopefully, generations coming upwards, for them, it's going to be a normalized topic of conversation that they won't, including the boys, that they won't have any issues kind of having those conversations. But I think at the moment, it's now about educating us, educating everybody else. And you're absolutely right. Actually, as I mentioned, there are kind of emotional and mental health symptoms associated with the menopause as well.
Yeah, and I think on that point, one thing I realize is that, of course, when you are in a workplace environment, we are working with people who are 23, 24, 25, and then there is that, you know, that group of ours who are over 50s.
Yeah.
So if you have a manager maybe who is 25, and you know, you're talking about menopause, what is this menopause that, you know? And in the worst case scenario, if that person maybe is a male, or I think even at family level, we need to encourage people to be talking about their, to their children, for them to understand, not just to say, oh, that is mom, she has started again, but they need to know what is going around. And in some cultures, it's also cultural, because in some cultures, there are things people don't talk about to their children. So I think we also need to continually, you know, say, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to suggest that everyone on this call goes back, takes note of what Lisa has said, introduce policies into your own workplaces. And Lisa, I'm going to be very forward and ask you if you can come back to us next year, and then we can give you an update on what we're doing.
Absolutely, of course.
Because I think this is a very ongoing thing.
Yes, absolutely. I'd be more than happy to. And similarly, if anybody needs any help with policies, etc., I'd be more than happy to assist. I'm more than happy, Helen, if you're able to share my details, or I can send them over. I'm more than happy for people to kind of contact me via email or telephone call if there's any other questions or questions around policies or anything else. I'm more than happy to help.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. So when Charlie sends you know, the last slide out later, he'll put all the details.
Fine.
And we'll see you again next year, Lisa.
Yes, well, good luck with it all. I'm sure you'll do some great work. I look forward to hearing the updates.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.